Welcome to Founder Files, the podcast for growth minded leaders, investors, and operators shaping the future of business. Each episode dives into the critical decisions behind scaling, from finance and fundraising to leadership, strategy, and technology. Founder Files is powered by Cypher, the AI powered and human led finance partner helping growing companies scale with clarity and confidence. Learn more at cypherfin.com. Yeah, so up to this point, we focused on, the structure, the forecasting, the planning, budgeting, the differences between those and how we use them or leverage them. Now let's move to part two, the consequences when things actually may break, where you have cash flow strains and you need to find solutions for that. Sometimes companies look fine on paper, especially from a profit standpoint, but they feel the pressure because they feel like they may miss payroll because they don't have enough cash, or they have vendor stress because their vendors are knocking on doors to get paid, or they may need emergency financing, last minute cost cutting. So let's talk about what actually happens when the cash story is not so positive and what type of solutions we can find for that. And how do we identify it early on? Like what type of KPIs we can look for to identify, how cash is doing. Do you have, first of all, let's talk about one of the pillars in reading financial data, which is profit does not equal cash. Can you maybe
Yeah.
talk more about that?
Yeah. I mean, exactly. Profit does not equal cash. I mean, I always say that profit's like water and cash is like air. I can live 3 days without water and I can live 3 minutes without air. So, I mean, where do you have to focus on, right? You
Yeah.
need to focus on air. You
Yeah.
need to focus on cash. Let me go through an example. Okay. So let's take a company. In this case, it was a combination of B2B services and SaaS, which is actually the world that I come from. So let me go through this example, and I'll go really in detail about it. Right, B2B
Yeah.
services company, SaaS, sort of B2B services and SaaS. Right, much like a company that I actually did myself. It had about 12 million revenue. It had, I don't know, 20, 22, somewhere between 20 and 25% EBITDA margin. Every quarter, they were positive on a P&L side.
Mm,
Yeah. They were growing really fast and they were getting ready to raise a Series B. Yeah.
okay.
You looked at it on paper, looked good. They had clean reporting. It was good. Yeah. As far as that goes. But when you get down to the actual cash, it's a little bit different, right? I mean, to go back to, let's look at it this way, right? The P&L showed strong quarter-to-quarter growth, upper gross margin, very stable, about 62%. They were having about 250,000 EBITDA a month. They had a runway. So here's a runway for those of you that it's not too familiar with. I don't know, but it's basically how much if everything else stopped and I have this much cash, how long can I live with this much cash? Right, that's my runway. Right, and in this case, it was more than a year. Okay. The founders, they felt good. The investors, they felt good, but their cash management wasn't what it should be.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
So what happened is that without thinking about it, or without, because they weren't watching it carefully enough, I think, but their accounts receivable started ballooning. Right. So as you know, from the CFO side, that's like a red light, because like anything else, once that starts happening, then there's things that automatically happen based on that. And the biggest thing is that your cash flow slows down.
Yeah.
Right. So this is exactly what happened. They're booking revenue in their P&L, but their customers, instead of paying in 30 days, they weren't paying they were paying 90 days plus.
Yeah.
Okay. So every month that looked profitable, because they were booking the revenue, right? Was adding about 300,000, something like that, to accounts receivable. If you think about that, your EBITDA, which is close to cash flow, right, is 250,000 a month, then if you're adding 300,000 to accounts receivable, that means that you're having that much less cash coming in, right? Not today, but in the future. So here's the next step that happened with them. right? I mean, it was several different things at the same time because they were growing at a pretty good clip because everything seemed to have been running good. Their margins were good. Everything, like we said, they started hiring delivery teams
Right.
before they were actually having things ready to bill.
Yeah.
Right. Right. So yeah, they had actually, it wasn't before they had it ready to build, before they actually had the revenue.
Yeah.
Right. And yeah, you got to plan a little bit ahead. What I tended to do in my business, I had about 30% of my employees were external.
Mhm.
So I could add or drop them as needed. Right.
Yeah.
That's not possible in every business, but a business like this, it's definitely possible. I know because that's how I did it. Right.
Yeah.
I'll get into some of the things you could do, how they could prevent some of these things, but let's sort of set up the thing. Because they were project costs are being incurred up front, right? Because they're hiring people, they're getting things ready, etc. You got cash flows happening before the inflows. That's a pretty normal thing, except for that it was so far ahead of their inflows, they're running out of liquidity, right?
Right.
Okay. And on top of this is something you spoke about earlier. They had a bunch of deferred revenue, and that deferred revenue was being pumped in there, okay,
Right.
or was being showing up on the P&L and or in the balance sheet. But so the P&L, you showed revenue recognition, right? Because it's coming
Yeah.
out like that, but the cash wasn't matching that.
Yeah.
So again, they look at the P&L, wow, it looks good. Yeah, everything's great. Boom. Right. And I actually broke this down because I've thought about this up to, because I wanted to give you a good example of a real thing that happened. Right. So in the first couple of months, as things started to go wrong, okay, P&L was looking good, but the amount of cash that they had was flattening out or maybe slightly decreasing. Okay.
Uh-huh.
Nobody got very worried because it's like, oh, it's timing. Yeah, these things happen. Cash goes up and down, blah, blah, blah. Right.
Yeah.
No big deal.
But
Right.
you can
So
quickly run out of cash if you don't have the right, cash flow management and forecasting that's separate from your P&L forecast.
exactly. So then they hired people. This increased their payroll by $250,000 a month. Couple of large clients delayed their payments, and suddenly they had this huge spike in their cash burn.
Yeah. Yeah.
Finance says, hey, collections are slowing down.
Uh-huh.
Okay. And this is part of the role. This has to do, sort of important here, is it has to do with often the role in finance is a subjugated role. Okay. Many founders or business owners do not appreciate that finance needs to be a strategic pillar of your business, right? That you not just need to have somebody doing your reporting, your accounting, and that kind of stuff. You need to have somebody at your side that's an executive that sees things from a business perspective with
Yeah.
the lens of a finance person. Just like you need a salesperson that needs at your side, the head of sales that looks at things from a strategic standpoint, but through the lens of sales, right?
Yeah.
That's really, really important. Okay. Sometimes you can't do that right at the very beginning in your startup, but once you get to a certain level and that level is not that far in, right? Once
Yeah.
you get over $1 million revenue, you need to have this kind of person, and you need to start looking to be sure that you have this kind of person, somebody that you can trust, somebody that's basically could step in as a CEO anytime, but sees things from a financial standpoint.
This was an example of a SaaS company, which is great.
This example, and what happens is after about month 3, when you get into month 4, suddenly they realize that they have a accounts receivable of 2.1 million,
Wow.
right?
Wow. Okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. A company that's making 12 million a year, that's a whole lot, right?
Yeah.
Their
And
EBITDA,
that's a process break as well. You need to bring on the collections process to make sure that you collect faster and find a solution to that.
exactly. I mean, that's something you should have already done at the latest in month 3.
Yeah.
when you saw that, when you see this spike of net cash burn, you need to really think about why that is. I mean, actually, the finance people should have said it in the beginning when they saw cash decreasing. They should have said, why is cash decreasing, right? And it may not have been able to see it right at the beginning, but very quickly they'll realize that accounts receivable are going up, and there's a problem, and there's a problem in the system because of that. Okay.
Yeah.
It could be it could be external factors, but it could also be internal factors. So what
Absolutely.
happened to this company is basically they still had a positive EBITDA, but but this accounts receivable was used, and suddenly your cash has already dropped by a $500,000,
Mm,
right? And the deferred revenue that they had was not as much as it it it, it should have been. The CEO was like, well, okay, it was a founder, and I mean, founders tend to be, entrepreneurial people tend to be less about detail and way more about the big picture, right?
yeah.
That's in a general way. It's not everybody's like that, but in a general way. And there's like, well, profit and loss, it looks great, right? I mean, it looks okay.
Yeah.
Well, suddenly what happens is, first of all, the P&L looks good because it doesn't talk about cash timing. And this is where forecasting comes in. Going back to this thing that we've been talking about the whole time, right?
Mhm.
By month 5, suddenly vendors are starting to call you all the time.
Yeah.
Hey, when am I going to get paid? Right?
Okay.
A couple of they had a couple of really big things that came in of an annual software renewal, right?
Mm,
That they use for their thing. That came in. Um, and that's another thing you got to look at about timing. When do these things hit? Okay. So I know that I need to have more liquidity, say at the beginning of the year when a software renewal hits, than I have to have in summer when I don't have this big cost ready to
yeah.
be happen, right? And this is just normal things that need to be managed within finance. And what happens, right? Um,
Mhm.
suddenly, suddenly you come down, somebody comes up and says, well, we only have a 6-week runway now, right?
Yeah.
In other words, we only have enough cash to take care of the next 6 weeks.
Agreed.
That's scary. I mean, that's
Very.
really, really scary. That's cold sweat scary. Trust me, I've been there. Okay. It's something that is not good. And then of course the board is saying, well, how did this suddenly happen?
Yeah.
What are you, and
Like
then
flooding.
mistrust comes in and et cetera,
Of
right?
course.
Yeah.
Yeah.